in the context of Meher Baba's life and teachings. From the very beginning. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Welcome one and all around the world, those of you who have tuned in for this, the second of our sessions on God Speaks. The title of this series is God Speaks as the Master Framework for Meher Baba's Darshana. This will be in 8 subdivisions and in 8 parts. By the way, for those of you who may not know this, these sessions are going to be uploaded on YouTube and where else? Facebook and YouTube and Facebook. They can be found already on youtube.com/Mehrabad, and you can also access the live streaming there. We're going to, at present, schedule to do these on Sunday, India time, Sunday at 5 p.m., which is when, of course, this is beginning. This is the second of these sessions, and here's a list of the 8 subdivisions on this topic, if we can put this slide up. This one is called God Speaks in its Historical Contexts, and here is what this whole part is about. We did the first half of it last time. God Speaks in the Context of Meher Baba's Life and Teachings, a history of the first and second editions, and a projected third and uncompleted edition by Francis Brabazon. I'll be talking about that today. An overview of God Speaks and a survey of the parts of the book. And if I have a moment, I will also say something about the style of God Speaks today. So last time in reviewing the history of God Speaks, I got as far as the publication of the book itself in 1955. Let me review a little bit of that once again. In the late 1940s, Baba started to engaged in an extensive dictation to his disciple, Dr. Abdul Ghani, one of his great Mandalay, who had particular interests in Sufism and philosophy. He was the one that Baba most often exchanged with on this kind of subject. And Baba went on dictating to him for several years, but then the New Life intervened in 1949. And in 1951, before the New Life was over, just before Mananash, Dr. Ghani died. And Baba gave out a very moving tribute to him, saying that Ghani was planning to do work with Ghani that no one else could have done. Baba didn't say what this was, but it does lead one to wonder whether the dictation of God Speaks was not part of what Baba had in mind here. In any case, when the New Life concluded in 1952, Baba went back to this project, and when he was in the West on his tour there, he read through what Dr. Ghani had written, and Baba was quite dissatisfied with it. Baba said half of what he had dictated was included, but half of it had been left out altogether. So now note the convergence of times here. In August 1953, as this particular slide up here shows, Meher Baba's dictation of God Speaks to Erich Desawala, Baba began to dictate to Erich, Erich's Baba's disciple Erich, what eventually turned into God Speaks. And the next month, but this was up in Dehradun, up in North India, and the very next month, Baba gave um, the message called The Highest of the High, in which he doesn't quite declare himself to be the avatar of the age, but he almost does. He says, if I am the highest of the high, then this, but if I am an ordinary man, then that. But it was a clear, it was obvious Baba was saying he was the highest of the high. In February of the next year in Hamirpur, Baba did declare himself as the avatar of the age. The dictation of God Speaks was continuing, and Baba concluded it in the following July. So the point I want to make is the dictation of God Speaks coincided exactly with Baba's public declaration of his avatarhood. So I myself think of God Speaks as an avataric communication, an avataric act. Here's another convergence. Baba passed the completed manuscript with instructions to Ivy Deuce, the Murshida of Sufism Reoriented. He passed this manuscript on to one of Ivy's murids, a Sufi named Lud Dimphal, who's an important player here. Lud Dimphal came to what's called the Three Incredible Weeks gathering, where 25 Westerners came to Mehrabad, and that period, that phase concluded with Baba's message, the final declaration, on September 30th. Well, a few days later, I'm forgetting the exact date, it might be October 9th, Baba gave up the alphabet board. So right after the conclusion of his imparting God Speaks, he gave up the alphabet board. And this reminds me of something that happened 30 years before this. In 1925, Baba began to handwrite the book, his 300-page manuscript that hasn't surfaced yet. Baba finished in November of 1926, and in January he gave up writing. And Baba at the time made the comment that the fact that he had given up writing would help give force to the book. So I'm struck by the fact that this happened again, something much like this. That is, Baba finished dictating God Speaks, and then he gave up the alphabet board and started to communicate through his own system of hand gestures, which doubtless you have seen in various of the films. So the Baba gave to the Sufis 2 packets of material. One was the material he had dictated to Erich Jesawala. Baba would dictate in many languages, and Erich would go to his room at night and write it out and read it back to Baba the next day for review and correction. There are 10 chapters, they're called 10 parts. That was the first packet. And the second was Dr. Ghani's manuscript, which Baba had reviewed. And he gave to the editors, that is Ivy Deuce and Don Stevens, both of whom were associated with Sufism Reoriented, which is an organization Baba had written and signed the charter for in 1952. Baba had given them instructions that they were to go through it and edit it. As to Dr. Ghani's manuscript, they were to pick out whatever portions they thought would be suitable for the supplement of a book like this. So you will find in God Speaks 10 primary chapters and a very extensive supplement. The supplement is from the Dr. Ghani material. So they worked on it and found a reputable New York publisher. Dodd Mead is the name of the publisher. Back in those days, New York was kind of the mecca of publication, or it was certainly one of them. I would say it was the most reputable place. So they had found a reputable New York publisher to publish the book, and it was in fact published in November of 1955. And here is another convergence in my mind. In November of 1955, Baba had organized a Sahavas program here at Mirabad. At this moment, we're just outside of Mirabad. If we went to the window, we could see the fringes of it. So he had 4 groups of 100 Indian men from different language groups come for 1 week each. And here is the point of it. It was not meant to be a darshan. It was meant, which is like thousands and thousands of people who bow down at Baba's feet and he gives them, prasad and so forth. It wasn't meant to be that. It was meant to be a sahavas. Baba did not want to give lectures, talks, explanations, that kind of thing. He wanted to be the personal, intimate exchange between the lover and the beloved. So what I want to be bringing out is that this is the most personal aspect of the avatar. At that same exact moment, in that very month, God Speaks was published, which is the complete opposite. It's God impersonal, God universal. God Speaks says almost nothing about the subject of love. The word is hardly mentioned. It never talks about master-disciple, lover-beloved interactions, anything like that. So what strikes me is that these 2 aspects of the avatar reached the apex of their expression at exactly the same moment. That strikes me as being a significant fact. So when you read God Speaks, it's worth remembering that. The Baba is talking about the universal, impersonal side of God, not the personal, divine, beloved side. So that's the publication of the first edition of God Speaks in 1955. Now we go on to the second edition, and there's actually a lot to be said about this. It's an interesting story. Right after finishing this book was published, immediately, as on this slide here, as early as 1956, Baba wrote to Murshid Adus. She was one of the 2 editors of God Speaks, right? She and Don Stevens, about suggestions for future editions of God Speaks. So already Baba was collecting material and compiling wishes of what he wanted to go into the second edition. And let me mention right now that the same basic 10 chapters are there. He added material to the supplement, including this here, which is again mentioned in this slide. Baba says, now one thing Baba wants you to do for future editions, and that is to add at the end of the book his previous article, Existence is Substance and Life is Shadow. This should appear at the complete end of the supplement, sealing the book, as he put it. So that's worth knowing. That'd be worth checking out. It's at the end of the supplement. Also, the second edition added a number of charts. Let me just show you some of the this side of the story. Here we go. Here are some of the charts. Are you able to get them? Is it coming up? Yeah. Okay. Let me go directly to the first edition. Had these as its major charts. These are from the first edition, 4 and 5. And then there were 2 as part of the supplement. Well, for the second edition, Baba had several charts added. Here is one of them, the third chart. In due course, we'll be going over these. The charts are really worth paying attention to. They really are worth studying. Baba also added this chart, the 4 journeys, which is a discourse that Baba later gave at the East-West Gathering, the 4 journeys discourse. He added this chart. We'll be going over this next week or the week after. It's very relevant to the first chapter of God Speaks. But most noteworthily, he added this one. This is probably the chart that people know best. So it wasn't there in the first edition. Rano Gailey drew this, came up with this, and it was added into the second edition. It's a diagrammatic representation of our subject next week, the divine theme. So these are some of the changes that happened with respect to the second edition. Here, I have to get back to the old show. In 1967, Baba went over God Speaks and started to, he made a bunch of changes. I'll have more to say about that. But at that time, Ivy Deuce, one of her, Lud Dimphal, who I've already mentioned, he was a very prominent member of Sufism Reoriented, who had been part of the Three Incredible Weeks gathering in 1954 and had collected the original manuscript from Baba. Well, he compiled two items that are now part of God Speaks. One of them is, here I can pull it up and show you on the screen, but it's this chart here, which you will find now in the back of new editions of God Speaks that you buy. It's quite a fine piece of work which correlates a lot of the different categories and terms that you'll find in God Speaks. It's very forbidding at first, but when you learn how to use it, it's really quite helpful. And the other thing so this is what Lud Dimphal sent to Baba in 1967. And he also compiled a glossary of words. You know what a glossary is? It will give a word like Atma, and then it will explain what Atma means, Paramatma. And this is very useful on its own, but one of the purposes which it also achieves is that it helps you to correlate terms from Sufism, Vedanta, and they call it mystical terms. It just means the English language, really speaking. So Baba, as part of what God Speaks does help to do, is to show how these very different traditions can be related to each other. It's not immediately obvious how that would be done. I mean, these traditions had a life quite in isolation from each other. So those two elements, this chart and also that glossary. Here, I'm going to go back and show you that chart just because, so that we have you've seen it once. It's this is it. So I'm sure you've all memorized it, and just one glance will bring it all back to mind.
Somebody's saying the audio is very feeble. Can you
Oh,
mic towards yourself?
okay. I'll be sure. I'll talk more into it. Okay, these are some of the sections of it. I know it's a very complicated looking and forbidding chart. I do think when we go over it, it will make more sense, and it's actually extremely helpful. So those new elements were added into the second edition, published in 1973. Now, Baba dropped the body, and it was quite a shock for everyone. And then they had the last Darshan in May. I think it went on into April, May, June. I forget the exact months. And later and there was a correspondence between Erish Jaswala, who had taken Baba's dictation when he dictated God Speaks, between him and Ivy Deuce about this new edition. If you have questions about this second edition, it was published in 73, people might say, well, who had the right to go do a new edition and make changes? Well, Baba himself had wanted it, and a lot of the changes were indicated by Baba himself. And I did read through all of that correspondence, and it looks like every single change was vetted and approved by Erich himself. So I myself have great confidence in that second edition. Let me also mention that the standard edition that everyone uses now is the second edition, its third printing. There was a printing in 1997, and the reason why that matters is that they reflowed the text, and all the page numbers are different. So standard page citations now refer to the third printing. There's been an Indian edition by Meher Manwani in Hyderabad that is a exact reprint of the American edition published now by Sufism Reoriented. That's the standard text that we all use. I don't imagine any new edition is under contemplation. It's hard to see what the reason would be for such a thing. Well, here's another part of the story that emerges. And here's this resulted from work that I myself did. I was in Australia at Avatar's Abode, the great center there, in 2010, and going through their archives. Now they've done massive work on the archives. At that time, they hadn't. So I was doing a summary report of what was there, and I found a folder of material, and as I went through it, I was flabbergasted to find out that it was notes that this disciple here, you can see in this slide, here he is, I'll blow him up a little bit, as an old man, Francis Brabazon, one of Baba's resident mandali from 1959 to 1969. Baba, he was a poet, and Baba was dictating to him points that he wanted Francis to incorporate in a new edition that he, Francis Brabazon, would do. Baba wanted a new edition of the book. This is not the 1973 edition. This is something else entirely. Now, I just did this out because what I had is readable. Yeah, here are some of the comments. This is Francis wrote this down. These are all in his handwriting, Francis's handwriting. They're all dated. It was 1967, the second half of 1967. And Francis writes here, and this is from Baba, in the revised edition of God Speaks, the present introduction, that would be Don Stevens' original introduction, is to be A, and another introduction, B, is to be written by Francis, in which he will say that Meher Baba directed him to re-edit God Speaks without changing the facts, and to include new important points given by Meher Baba for the book. In the work of this editing, he was helped by Erich. So Francis Brabazon was supposed to work with Erich in doing a new edition. And there are, I don't know, 100, 200 pages of these little notes that Francis wrote down. What they look like is indications from Baba of topics that he wanted Francis to remind him of, and that the Baba would then explain. But that never happened. So Francis never did that in addition, and it's pretty impossible to see how he could have. But Baba wanted a new edition of the book with some new content added, and Baba had criticisms of the book too. We'll look at some of them in a minute, but I'll read this too. This is what Francis Brabazon's A Siege of the Universe right now. So Naman, what will you do if we have Mahapralaya? That will really interrupt our live stream. Anyway, I think I had just completed reading what Francis had to say about the general instructions about an introduction. So let me go on with this about the 3 prongs of the assignment that Baba gave him. And then there's this slide, from this note and others in the folders, one gathers that Francis's job had three parts. First, he was to re-edit the prose, leaving the meaning unaltered. And the Avatar's Abode folder has about, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 handwritten pages of Francis's where he had started doing this. And apparently Baba liked it. It was what that description says. He made it read in a more poetic and fluent way, but it didn't change the meaning of it. Second, he was to incorporate various new points Baba was giving him into a new section, presumably intended for the supplement to be entitled Additions. Third, as mentioned in the quotation above, Francis was to write a new introduction. Now, here are some of the points that Francis noted down. This is from this Glow article that I wrote in 2010. You can find it there if you want to read more about this. And this page here is a page in Francis's handwriting taking down notes from Baba. They're interesting subjects. They're little blurbs on this and on that. This is about the whim, the beginning of the whim, and this one, this typed one here, Rano Gailey typed out some of this material for Francis. This is about 18,000 planets with human life on it. This really settles, there's discussion of whether there are 3 such planets or 18,000. And I would say this is the piece of evidence that settles the matter. There are 18,000 with human life in the universe. And all kinds of other really interesting little tidbits. They're too hard to read here. And I won't take the time to go through them, but you can see what they look like. Here, I'll show you what one more looks like this. Yes, and this is a list of some of the topics. Maybe I'll read these out. In fact, let me go to something that may be more readable than this. Yeah, these are some of the topics, points that Baba had mentioned to Francis, and Francis was supposed to recall them to Baba's attention at a later date, and Baba would explain them. But that never happened. So it's pretty impossible to imagine how this job could have been done. I don't think Baba gave Francis enough input. But here are some of these points. Let me read through a couple of them on this list. The evolution of consciousness and bodies depend on sanskaras. The play of sanskaras in madness. All creation, evolution, reincarnation, and involution depend on sanskaras. August 15th, Francis wrote down the dates. Baba said these things. Thick and thin sanskaras. Shadow and shadows. 18,000 inhabited worlds. We took a look at that one. Billions of stars. 50,000 billion of points. Substance and shadow. Nature and habit, etc. Things like that. In one place, Baba made the comment, the chapter on the fourth plane is a mess, and he was going to have to dictate a whole new chapter on the fourth plane. So Baba was responding critically to his own previous dictation. This never got done because there really wasn't enough from Baba for Francis to do it, and Francis got Alzheimer's, and so this job was never finished. But I do think this is a very significant episode. God Speaks, and I'll spend about 1 minute on a very big topic here, which is that a conclusion you can't avoid is that Baba regarded God Speaks as something that was imperfect, and that will radically affect how people look at these books in the future. I don't think it's going to diminish at all the importance of God Speaks or the extent to which people view it as God's revelation to humanity. But what it will affect is the attitude of looking at books and scripture as the perfect inerrant repository of all truth. I think that people will learn to read these books in a new way. So that's a huge topic about which I could talk at great length on another occasion. Let me show you just another body of material here, which I mentioned before, but is worth taking note of. This slide up here is from Dr. Ghani's manuscript, and here you see, I'll expand this so you can read a little better, the 10 states of God. Baba clearly dictated to Dr. Ghani back in 47, 48, whenever it was, material for this chapter. And this is where God Speaks began, with this chapter and with this chart. We don't have an early chart from this period that's surfaced yet. But the current chapter that we have in God Speaks is explicitly based on this. Here's the funny thing. In God Speaks, we're told that Baba is the author of the first 8 chapters, and Erich Jesawala is the author of chapters 9 and 10. That's what the book says. But the funny thing is that Erich took most of what he wrote from this material written up by Dr. Ghani. Erich Ghani's version was much more expansive. It had a lot of material from the 1920s and 1930s, and Erich cut that out. Also, Erich did put some new material in, very significant new material also. But in any case, the basis for it was Baba's dictation, and this is where God Speaks began from. It was from this chapter. Okay, let's see. How much time should we've had all these crazy interruptions today with the live streaming. This is what you will find in God Speaks then. Here's the table of contents. There's the various kinds of front matter to God Speaks. There's actually a dedication, which we'll look at closely another time. Baba dedicated it to the illusion that sustains the reality, which is very puzzling, because you would think that the reality, which is God, is what sustains the illusion, right? Wouldn't you think that? But he said, to the illusion that sustains the reality. Then there's a preface, as you can see here, by the 2 editors. And then there's an extensive introduction by Don Stevens that really talks about who Meher Baba is as avatar and gives an account of his life. There's an introduction to the second edition. The second edition, of course, was published in 1973 after Baba dropped the body. And Don reviews the later part of Baba's life and brings things up to date. Then you can see here the 10 chapters, parts 1 through 10. They're called parts. What that means is chapter. And then after that, after the 10th part, you get the supplement. And let me see, I think the next page will be showing. Yeah, here you can see the contents for the supplement. There are 37 different items in it. And these are topics, bits of material that the editors, Ivy Deuce and Don Stevens, selected from Dr. Ghani's book. He has about 250, 300 pages, and as Baba had told them, they took out little bits, and some of them are substantial, 10, 15 page chunks, and put it in here. So this is a major part of the book. And it concludes, after this, there's a epilogue and a glossary. I mentioned the glossary before by Lud Dimful, and in the back leaf there's this chart which I showed earlier, chart 11 by Lud Dimful. And also, when you now buy the book, there's a little pamphlet written by Ira Dietrich, who's the president of Sufism Reoriented, The Story of God Speaks, which tells its history. A lot of the history which I've given here is taken from there. So I will spend as a last few minutes, and then we're done for the day, a few comments on the style of God Speaks. God Speaks is often found to be a difficult book, and people will often comment that it's very repetitive. Well, so far as content goes, next week I'll talk about the divine theme, which I think will illuminate that aspect of it a lot. But stylistically, it is very, I would say, hyper redundant. It has very long sentences much of the time, and very often a sentence in its whole first clause will repeat a lot of the content from the sentence before. And Baba will move at a glacial pace, adding little bits of information and seeming to say the same thing over and over again. Well, let me speak to this point. Let's suppose someone who is skeptical of Meher Baba and says, well, Meher Baba just, couldn't get his thoughts together and he just repeated himself a lot. Okay. One point about that is that if you read so many of his messages, they're not in this style at all. They're crisp, direct, pointed, and this is true from the beginning to the end. There's a whole bunch of messages in 1932 like this, so you can read them for yourself. And Baba was giving out messages in the 1950s that are very forceful, pointed, short, succinct, direct, like that. So, but this was not the only style in which Baba could dictate. That's one point. Also, read Baba's discourses, and you'll see these beautiful, lucid, clearly organized essays. The other book of Baba's that is in this same style is Infinite Intelligence. And what I think is that Baba was engaging this topic in a certain way that engages the intellect but goes beyond the intellect. It's not enough just to understand these ideas. You have to marinate in them. Do you know marinate? Like if you're cooking something. I'm not a cook, so what would you marinate? You would put it in some kind of a sauce for 24 hours, say, so that the taste can saturate the whatever it is, nuts or what, I don't know, what do you marinate? Chicken, something like that. Yeah, you'd. When reading God Speaks, part of the effect of the style is to cause you not just to intellectually grasp the ideas, but to marinate in the hal. This is the Sufi term of the state of intoxication, to imbibe the experience and vision of what Baba is talking about. And so if we had more time, I would read passages and try to illustrate. But when you read it, it's worth lingering and reading it aloud. I think that the sound of it is a part of the experience of it. I find that God Speaks has what I call the ocean voice in it, the voice of that infinite ocean that is God. And if you read it aloud, you get not just an understanding, but a feeling and a glimpse. So that's a little bit on the style. I'm very glad that they didn't edit that feature of it out of existence. It makes it more difficult to read, that is true. But when you acquire the taste, it becomes very intoxicating. And this will be the last thing I'll say on this for today. This is a comment by Francis Brabazon that he wrote in a letter back home to Australia. By the way, when Francis joined Baba in 1959, he brought with him the manuscript of Stay with God, which Baba had told him to write in 1955 at that very Sahavas when God Speaks was published. And when Baba had the book read out to him, he loved it, and he said, it's the counterpart to God Speaks, and it's second in importance only to God Speaks, and it brings God Speaks to life. So if you're dealing with God Speaks, I think it's worth being aware of Stay with God as a very important counterpart. But Baba was dictating content to Francis, and this is how Francis describes the method Baba would use. Baba dictated 3 new discourses for the book. That's Stay with God. Francis describes the process. Here Francis writes, he has given me some 6 pages of original material. I, of course, with the aid of Erich, had to work it all out into English words. Erich and I spent 3 or 4 whole sessions with Baba on this, with me writing and rewriting between sessions until Baba was completely satisfied. I have also been employed by Baba putting other material of his into English words. This experience has shown me how almost impossible it is, even with Erich interpreting Baba's gestures, and with Erich working with one, to get Baba's say down into English words. Writing down the words that Erich speaks from Baba's gestures, now get this, this is really striking, from Baba's gestures, does not get the real sense because, first, Erich is translating from a language Baba's sign language. That's its own language, right? Which is complete in itself. Isn't that an amazing statement? When Baba would express it in his sign language, it was a complete communication by itself. And trying to render that into words is like trying to translate from Gujarati to Chinese, right? It's like a huge labor that took a lot of work. And second, because Baba gradually develops his discourse over a series of sessions. During the first session, he only intimates his subject. So, one has to try and grasp the ideas clearly and then find English words to express them. I have never seen another explanation of Baba's dictation of messages like this, but I personally feel this is a beautiful account of how God Speaks was dictated. Baba, I feel, was in a state and in an aspect of avataric work in this avataric phase of trying to explain things that had never been said before and for which there was no human language. And Baba was working to articulate from the infinite depths of his gnosis an understanding of things for the benefit of humanity for the next 700 years. So I think that's enough for this session. Next time, we'll pick up with looking at the divine theme. Are there any questions that have come in or anything? Any of you have any questions? Okay. Well, maybe that's enough for this time. So we go on to the second division. By the way, all these sessions are going to be up on the YouTube. youtube.com/Mehrabad. You'll find it there. So, Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.